and we can start it from here. And thank you, Michelle, for giving your perspective on avocados versus mangoes, because I do think that is a very important debate to be had. Lovely. And yeah, so feel free to just pop into the chat, anything else, any hellos, where you're from, organisation, country, etc., just so that everyone knows who's in the room. Okie dokie, let's move on to just a very quick explanation for those who didn't join us for webinar 1. We are now at the webinar 2 point, and this just gives you a sense of the flow of the project. So webinar 1, we talked about the needs assessment that many of the CSOs as part of this project and part of Water for Women completed, asking them about their needs for qualitative methods, support and information and experiences, but also very much around the change agents focus of their work and what kind of monitoring, evaluation, learning processes they're putting in place to assess changes, specifically gender equality, inclusion changes, and how this project, being qualitative focused and remote focused, how it could support you in your MEL monitoring, evaluation, learning programs and processes. So the needs assessment we fed back to you, and then this is the second webinar where we're now getting to the kind of pointier end of the funnel, where we've curated some methods and we're going to be presenting them to you today. Curating being, as you can imagine, there's a very, very wide range of qualitative methods, but based on your needs and your interests, we've identified some to present to you today and share some insights and ideas, and they might be really applicable to your midterm reviews, but also ongoing qualitative MEL. And in the third webinar, we'll talk about that at the end. That's going to be giving you the results of some piloting processes that we'll be doing with select self-selected CSOs, and also present to you an online platform where all of these resources and experience and insights are going to be placed in a way that's very adaptable and usable for CSOs, especially Water for Women CSOs. Okay, so the agenda for today in a little bit more detail is just to tap into some of the concerns and questions that you raised in the needs assessment about qualitative MEL, and just give a little bit of a response around some of those key areas, which are fantastic pointers for where we need to orient this project. Then we'll present to you, Jess is going to be presenting to you some curated methods. And then we're going to ask you, out of the ones we've presented to you today, which ones might you use or would you consider using? Noting that this is a small sample and we're going to be presenting and guiding you around a much larger sample as the project evolves. We want to go in a little bit of depth today. Okie dokie. So first of all, kicking off with your concerns and questions about qualitative MEL, I'm now going to hand to Naomi, and she can now talk you through some of the ideas we've had in response to those. And now that I've introduced Naomi, I realise that I haven't quite introduced myself, Melita Grant from ISF, and I'll also hand over to Jess to introduce herself now.
Hello, everyone. Good morning from Switzerland. My name is Jess. I'm also with ISF.
Thank you. And thank you, Naomi. I'll hand to you now.
Thanks, Melita and Jess. And so I'm Naomi, also from ISF, and the fourth member of our team, Juliet Willits, will be joining us shortly. She's coming across from another meeting and you'll hear from her later as well. So apologies, kids have just arrived home from school and are walking past my window, but the sound should be fading. So in the needs assessment, you identified a number of things that you found challenging or had questions about relating to qualitative MEL, and they were around sampling, maintaining data quality, the idea of stakeholders being resistant to the value of qualitative research, confidence in data. And from memory, one of the main things that was identified were concerns around how to design MEL strategies. And so that's the first thing we're going to respond to today. And what this slide shows is this idea that a MEL strategy can be kind of like a series of building blocks put together. So good MEL starts by aligning all parts of the strategy. So what you want to see is coherence between the framework and the theory that's guiding your overall strategy, and then the building blocks that make up the particular steps. So the overarching approach, the collection tools, the analysis tools, and then processes to encourage use of the findings of the MEL process to ensure that it's fed back into program evolution. And so coherence, alignment, they're really important words. I think the main thing to note here is that once you've got your framework and your theory in place and your overarching approach, there is flexibility to use different kinds of techniques for collection tools, for analysis tools, for encouraging use. But what you want to think about in choosing those different components is how it aligns from one end to the other. And keep this slide in mind, you'll be seeing this kind of image again later when Jess introduces some of the curated tools that we've prepared for today. So designing a good MEL strategy is also about thinking about the kinds of questions that a qualitative as opposed to a quantitative MEL strategy can best respond to. So a quantitative MEL process might ask questions around how many, how much, how often, how frequently, what proportion of people, and to what extent a certain outcome or phenomenon might have occurred. Whereas a qualitative process tends to be more concerned with questions around how and why. So what factors have influenced outcomes? Why is a certain outcome occurring? What led to that? And of course, those questions are highly complementary, and that's why increasingly what we're seeing and seeking to implement in different MEL strategies is a mix, so mixed methods approaches. And what we've got on this slide are 3 possible ways that you can combine qualitative and quantitative MEL approaches in your strategy. The first is known as exploratory, where you might use a qualitative approach to do some interviews, find out what kinds of things are going on for people, bring to light some kind of sense of what certain people are experiencing that you might not have expected, whether your theory of change is coming to bear for particular communities and participants. And then once you've decided, uncovered what those themes might be or those outcomes might be, you could follow up with a quantitative process to get a bit of a better sense of frequency and how many people are experiencing the kinds of things that you found and the extent of importance to those people. Another option would be explanatory, where you flip that order. So start with a quantitative process, find out how much of something there is, how many people think a certain way or have experienced something, and then follow that up with a qualitative process where you might understand how that occurred, what kind of factors led to that, why is that happening, and is that important, how important is that to the people involved. And finally, parallel convergent mixed methods approach, which is quite a mouthful, but is a long way of saying do both at the same time and mix them up in different ways so that you can either compare the data from your qualitative and your quantitative process, relate them to each other somehow, and then ultimately use them as a package to interpret what the process has meant for your program. So moving on now to this set of 3 lovely concerns about qual MEL. So these relate to whether qual MEL can be considered quality in terms of the data produced, whether you can have confidence in it, and this idea that some of you shared around stakeholders being resistant to whether qualitative approaches are rigorous. And so the main thing to note here is that qualitative and quantitative approaches come from different traditions, and so they have slightly different ways of measuring quality and rigor, but there are absolutely strategies to ensure that both can be considered highly rigorous and reliable forms of research. And that what we're about to flash up, if you put the first one up, Jess, is that, thank you, that across the idea of truth, consistency, neutrality, and applicability, they have different ways of measuring the rigor of a certain research process, and research and evaluation I'm using a little bit interchangeably here. So with quantitative research, it comes much more from a scientific tradition of what rigor entails, and it's concerned with ideas around validity, reliability, objectivity, and generalizability, whereas a qualitative process, the concern is less around scientific rigor and much more around trustworthiness. And that relates to ideas such as credibility, so whether you can have confidence in the findings that the process is producing, dependability, that's about the stability of findings over time, and whether the findings, interpretation, and recommendations can be strongly supported by the data that the evaluation or research produced. The idea of confirmability, whether a different researcher could complete the same process and find similar findings. Transferability, which is about whether the qualitative evaluation or research could be transferred to other settings with a potentially different set of respondents. And finally, adding to those four, this idea of reflexivity. And so that's that the researchers have a level of critical self-reflection, acknowledging that their own worldviews, history, disciplinary perspective will shape the research and the way they engage with participants, and also the way they interpret those findings. And it's important to be transparent about that. So finally, what this slide has is a collection of some possible strategies to support quality in qualitative evaluation, which can help then working with partners and others who may need to have a bit of a boost to their confidence in the data that's produced through a qualitative process. And I'm just going to pull out a couple of examples from each. What this slide has, and you'll get this later to refer back to, is that there are many strategies across design, collection and analysis phases. So with design, for example, you might pre-test instruments such as interview guides to see how they go and refine them. You can create an audit trail. So again, this sort of theme of transparency in the way research is done and reported. In the collection side of things, one option would be to check and validate data with participants, a form of member checking. You can make sure that interviews are audio recorded so that when you analyse data, you're not relying on memory or notes of the interviewer, but you also have a recording to go back to. And for analysis, some strategies to improve confidence and ensure quality could be to triangulate or compare with other data sources and literature. To support themes and interpretations with the actual data, so that could include quotes direct from the participants. And ultimately, the really important thing is to report transparently what the data was, how you interpreted meaning from that, and what the limitations of the process might have been. So now I'm going to hand over to Melita. Yep, thumbs up, Melita, that's helpful.
Thank you, Naomi. That was fantastic. And I know there is a lot of complex language there, but as Naomi said, you'll have these slides to go back to. We'll send them out and we'll put them on the hub, the Water for Women hub, as a set of slides. And you'll also have the recording of this webinar to refer to, and a quick Google of any of those words comes up with a wealth of information, and it's pretty exciting to kind of go down rabbit holes of all of those elements, or just feel free to flick us an email and we're very happy to share what we have at hand about any of those approaches, mixed methods, or any of that terminology around rigor. So some more questions. You've asked us about sampling. How can we be confident about our sample sizes and our processes for sampling? How do we ensure that we feel confident about the results depending on who we've actually interviewed or engaged with in the process? Some research has shown that the magic number for interviews is around 6 to 12. In that, you can probably get most of the key themes and ideas from a group of about 6 to 12 people as a starting point to ensure that you've covered most of the ideas and the themes in a particular subpopulation. So whatever your particular group is that you're looking at. And what we mean by that is these researchers or authors on the left-hand column here have done studies into what percentage saturation was achieved with a certain number of interviews. And saturation means the point at which no new themes or ideas really are coming through. You're just hearing the same sorts of points raised by subsequent interviewees. And so just taking a couple of examples here, the one at the top there, Morgan and colleagues, 2002, found that most concepts were identified through the first 5 to 6 interviews, and 80 to 92% of concepts were identified within 10 interviews. And just going down the list there quickly, Guest et al. Said 6 interviews reached about 70% saturation, and 12 interviews reached around 92% saturation. So we won't go through every single study there, but just to let you know that this kind of compiling different authors' experiences and research on saturation and on the magic equation for saturation sampling has given us this number of 6 to 12 interviews being a good ballpark to aim for in terms of getting the key themes, the key ideas from a particular subpopulation. With focus groups, the number is around 3 to 6. And so you'll see here in the graph on the far left, that reads the mean number of new codes. So in the first focus group, around 60 new codes were identified through that focus group. And then in the subsequent ones, there was 13 new codes, 17. A code is like a theme or an idea. And this particular study found that 80% of themes were discoverable within 2 to 3 focus groups, and 90% were discoverable within 3 to 6 focus groups. So that's why we're saying sort of a magic number would be around 3 to 6, because you're getting 90% of the codes or the themes coming through with that sort of a scale. Thank you, Jess. So now we're going to, after answering some of those concerns and questions, we're now going to move into some curating of the methods that we've been looking at and analysing in terms of your needs and interests. We are going to have a lot more interaction in the next session, but I might just pause for 2 minutes and just ask, does anyone have any questions or any queries, anything that comes to mind that you're confused about, that you want to know more about in terms of what we've just thrown at you in terms of qualitative MEL theory and research and principles and practices? I'll just see if anyone has anything they'd like to raise at this point we can respond to.
Hello. Hi, can I?
Yes, please. Hello. How are you, Esther?
I'm fine. I'm fine. Thank you so much. I have a quick question. In one of the slides, we have explained that there are 3 methods of conducting the survey. It's explanatory, exploratory, and parallel conversion. That are the 3 methods that could be used while conducting the survey. So I just wanted to know if which would be the best one, if there is any. Is there anything, is there any approach which is one of the, wow, this is the best one? Or, you know, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a lovely question. I'll throw to Naomi, but she may say how long is a piece of string, but let's see what she says.
Sorry, not such a clear answer. It depends.
Yeah.
So it really does depend on what kind of outcomes you're seeking. And it, say, for example, if you already have a sense of what you think you might find, you might go with an explanatory kind of approach where you start with a quantitative method that's a bit more deductive. You're testing your hypothesis, and then you go to qualitative to explore a little bit some of the dynamics behind that. If you're really not sure what sorts of outcomes you might be expecting to find, then an exploratory might be more appropriate, where you first of all talk to people, identify some themes, some emerging phenomenon, and then you might move to the quantitative approach to sort of test how widespread what people are telling you really is amongst the people that you're working with. So yeah, I'd say it depends, but a useful way to think about it might be questioning whether you're really not sure what you might find and you want to go and look for things that you might not have anticipated, or whether you have a sense of what's going on and you want to test that and then try to understand a little bit more the why and the how.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Anybody else? And feel free to jump in with your voice as well, or type it.
Elisa and Naomi, thank you very much. I was just going to suggest that depending on the kind of research that you're doing, it can be really helpful to use a quantitative data collection for example, in Australia, going onto the Australian Bureau of Statistics website and getting a whole lot of data around demography and population and so forth. And then to use the more qualitative approaches to go out and actually ask people more fundamental descriptive questions about what their lives are like and why they're making certain kinds of decisions and what kind of values that they hold. And that approach, the teams I've worked on have used in social and gender impact assessment, and it's been really, really helpful. And where the qualitative work comes in really handy also is that if you're working in countries where their Bureau of Statistics information is out of date, so they might have done a census perhaps 8 or 10 years ago, you can actually use that census statistical data to inform the further questions that you're asking when you're going out into the field. So that's just another way of using, that's a little bit more that third option, but it is really helpful to know that you don't specifically have to sit solely with doing qualitative or solely with doing quantitative. There's space for a mix in your approach. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's fantastic point. And probably what we should put as a box before all of the, I guess, the linear kind of depictions is that desktop element, whether it be quant or qual or both, hopefully both. So that's a really great point. What do we already know about that situation in terms of statistics and previous literature, etc., that can inform us? And then that can then inform whether it be an interview guide or a quantitative approach, or we talked last time about inductive and deductive methods. So you could use your, as Helen just talked about, then you could use your statistics from the census as a way to then inform a deductive process where you're testing what is in the census, or you could use it as a way, just a framing, and then an inductive process, which is much more emergent and open-ended exploration. So there's a few layers there, but a really good point that we at ISF, we always start with a literature review of some nature, and that includes trying to obtain that secondary data for sure. Yeah. Any other points you wanted to? Oh, Akila, hello, how are you?
Just wondering, Melita, in what Professor Helen said about, using the existing data, there are contexts in which there is no data, and if, for instance, the urban context, and particularly the urban poor context. And whatever sampling we do and whatever research we do is also not considered robust enough. It's too micro. It's, it's dealing with one segment. And city urban planning, the way urban, development happens is complicated. It's not, it can't be just, sort of narrowed down to a certain area or a zone or, a set of population. So there is a certain kind of quandary over there, whether, what we do, will it influence the policy and programs to the extent it should? So we tend to use a lot of anecdotal and a lot of, voice and that kind of, I don't know whether it's qualitative data, but it's certainly very critical information. That becomes more of a, enabler for change than, a structured study in terms of the kind of work we do. I mean, I'm not talking about an academic work. I'm talking about the kind of action research that groups like us do.
Wonderful. Thank you, Akila. That's really interesting at that practical level of what are you trying to do this MEL for, monetary evaluation learning, or the research for? Who are you trying to influence? And then adapting your methods to that purpose. So you have found that a rapid participatory anecdotal vignette, we even call it, approach is most influential in your context. And so that is why you would design your process along those lines. Exactly. Fantastic point.
Amazing. Yeah, just to kind of add on that, Melita, one of the things that I think I come from an engineering background. So I'm an engineer turned geographer turned, I'm not quite sure what I am anymore. But I think what's interesting is I grew up with this word anecdotal and trying to find out like, oh, it's not real data, or it's not valuable data because it's just snippets or little bits here and there. But I think the more and more I realize how valuable this is for helping change people's minds, exactly what you were speaking about, Akila, I find that I am more interested in finding ways to make that kind of snippet or vignette data as robust as it can be so that people feel more comfortable and confident with it. So one way, for example, would be setting up a system to collect that kind of quote unquote anecdotal evidence on a regular basis through some of the things we talked about last week, like a WhatsApp group, or even, you know, a Facebook group where people can share a picture and a quotation that they've heard as part, you know, field staff can share that information. And then it moves from being that kind of anecdotal stuff that you've heard in the field, but you didn't really write down and you don't have documented, to something that's documented where you have that audit trail. And then it's part of a more robust methodology, and you can feel a bit more confident about sharing that with individuals. I know that's been really helpful for me, and it comes back to that: how do we make data more? How do we build more confidence in our data? And part of it is pre-planning and having a structure around how we collect that data, even if that's just a WhatsApp group. I think it can be a really valuable way of collecting those kind of more, you know, quotes or snapshots or things that we bubble up to the top from especially with field staff. So I hope that little tidbit helps, but I just, something that I've been thinking about a lot.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, great.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for those questions. I'm making a celebration on those points that were raised then. So thank you very much. Now we will move on to some of the curated methods. And then as questions arise, as I said, just feel free to pop it in the chat. If we don't get to it during the webinar, then we will definitely follow up any questions on the hub and send a link around to you for that page on the hub. Okay, so now let's get into which methods have we chosen to share with you today and why. The next slide shows that, thanks Jess, shows the framework that Naomi already presented to you in terms of a good design. So a good design will have all of these elements in it. It will consider that overarching framework or theory that we talked about in that sort of cascading hierarchy of approaches last time. It will also consider the overarching approach, and that's also another way of saying methodology. So the system of methods that you choose, that mixed methods approach, the sequencing, all of those sorts of things you're considering at that point of the. And it comes down to Akila's point of why do we choose certain methods for what purpose? What are we trying to achieve? So why do we collect data in certain ways in order to achieve that outcome, that theory of change focus? And then, so that's otherwise known as methodology. And then we've got our collection tools, that's otherwise known as methods. And then we've got our analysis tools. And then we have the approach for using the data, the process of analyzing, and how are we going to disseminate it, how are we going to use that information in adaptive management, in our learning processes personally, but also organizationally and sector-wide. So we'll be using that framework for the next pieces of the puzzle that we show to you. And this is an example of how there's a lot of different options under each one of those. So for instance, under collection tools, you'll be very familiar with interviews and surveys and workshops and diaries and focus groups and various participatory activities, storytelling, photographs and observations. So all of these are legitimate qualitative methods. And then in terms of analysis tools, some of this is a little bit jargony, but I think a lot of CSOs will have done quite a lot of these. And we asked you in the needs assessment survey, and you did talk about case study and content analysis and thematic analysis, textual analysis. So throughout this project, we're going to be introducing you to this range of analysis tools, and also on the website at the end of this, we're going to be presenting you with some kind of I guess, guidance around how to make these analysis tools really work for you and how to increase your capacity with analysis. That's something that came through in the needs assessment survey quite strongly, that people felt that their confidence in analysis and using the analysis, that last stage, utilization tools, the using part was they had less confidence in than perhaps actually conducting the interviews and that kind of thing. So this is just to give you a sense of how many approaches might be fitting under each one of those. But now we're going to move into 3 curated approaches that we've brought together to share with you today. And some of you may have used these before, so feel free to jump in the chat and share your experiences when we ask you for some feedback around each one of those. So thank you, Jess.
Wonderful, thanks, Melita. Yeah, so just to kind of bring us back, so we've done this needs assessment. We've done also some interviews with other research organizations within the fund and beyond, and developed a very long list of possible approaches. I'm all about long lists. And the idea with that was then to compare and contrast this long list with what was found in the needs assessment. And then we pulled out a couple of main themes based on what we're trying to accomplish. What is our goal? How are we planning to use these tools? And so obviously we're looking at gender and gender norms, looking at WASH, looking at things that ideally would be applicable remotely, and then also specifically for change agents. So again, we're adding all these layers on top of this long list. But a long list is a way of just making sure from literature that you're getting everything that you could get. And what's tricky about a long list is that lots of organizations will use different words. And so you've maybe heard us speak about using things like methods, which possibly could include data collection and analysis tools, but other organizations will use slightly different terminology. What might be considered a method to some might be a methodology to others. And so this gets a bit complex but we tried our best to create a giant spreadsheet, if you will, of all of the different possible things that we could do. And we've actually come up with 10, but because of time, we're only going to be sharing 3 in depth with you today. But just so you can see a little bit of this overall of the 10. And again, we ran through the lenses of gender, remote, change agent appropriate, and WASH focus appropriate. So the ones we're going to talk about today are 3. One is called card sorting or Q methodology. Maybe you've done some card sorts previously. It really comes from a lot of kind of PRA focused work where you put cards in different piles. Maybe pile sorting might be another one. But we're going to present to you a way of doing a bit of a mixed methods qual and quant approach. Second one is called the internal learning system, or ILS, and this is a diary-based approach. And then photo voice, which I think actually a few of the partners are using within the fund, and it becomes a really, so I'm always excited about photography, so photo voice is something that I love. Other ones that we'll be putting on the website and hopefully chatting with those who are going to be piloting and working with us to test these. Include life histories, so this would be getting timelines of individuals' lives, change agents, for example, a latrine producer. How did they start to become a latrine producer? And if they're a female latrine producer, what happened in their life to get them to that place? And what are the challenges and the struggles that have come along that side, and how can those challenges and struggles be used to support others? Participatory rapid appraisal, many of you are really familiar with PRA methods, but there are ways to move that into remote or hybrid modalities. Strengths-based qualitative evaluation approaches. This is something that Juliette has used quite extensively, but it's a way of leaning into the positive things that have happened as an entry point to find out what other things could possibly happen for change agents as well. GALS, which is an approach designed by Linda Mayo, the Gender Action Learning System. This is a workshop-based approach where you're able to design participatory activities in order to support, not only collection of evaluation data, but then also using that data to strengthen the individuals who are participating as well. So you get a dual. It's kind of an intervention plus evaluation mixed together. Outcome harvesting, which many of you are familiar with. success case methods or positive deviance. So finding out those individuals who are doing exceptionally well and finding out why, and trying to find out if there's ways that we can, you know, support others in those ways. And then theory-based most significant change, which Melita has worked at with extensively with the East Meets West team, and finding a way to identify possible domains for most significant change, which you might be familiar with, based on theory and looking at the theory of change. So that's just a very quick summary of those 10 methods. Again, we'll be coming back to these in our next webinar, as well as putting these up on the website and testing these with 3 CSO partners over the coming days. But we wanted to present to you today, as promised, 3 of these approaches, so that you might be able to use them whether or not you're going to pilot with us, and hopefully learn a little bit in the process. So without further ado, I'd like to share with you a little bit about Q-sort, or card sorting methodology. So this methodology was designed in the 1930s as a way of understanding the different sentiments, particularly in America, around religious freedoms and religious liberties. And so it was a set of cards. I believe there was 56 cards, maybe someone else knows on the call, that were the original sorting cards, and they were statements around different things that you agreed or disagreed with. So the cards were designed in such a way to spread the population and to understand what are the different clusters of the different groups. So a lot of polling, if you've been watching the American election, or you are involved in American politics in any way, or you follow that, or you watch CNN ever, you may have heard a lot of these words where they kind of subcluster individuals into smaller groups. And that really comes from the beginning of this approach, where the idea was to try to find out what are the different types of individuals. So, for example, you might have a group of government actors and want to understand, okay, we have some government actors that have this kind of persona or identity, and some that are a bit more progressive or a bit more conservative. But how do you really know that from actual data? And so what we're the method is a way of sorting cards. You write statements on cards and are able to kind of sort and cluster these cards into categories. So again, the theory of change will lead to the cards. The overarching methodology is something called Q methodology. You can do this in interviews or focus group discussions, and you need a deck of predetermined statement cards. Then you are able to do, it sounds a bit complicated, but there is software that does this automatically for you, which is always something that I love, called second order factor analysis, which I really don't even understand. But the idea being it helps you to put these into clusters and groups as a way of designing personas. So you may have heard of, just trying to think of a specific persona. I can't think of anything on the top of my head, but anyway, you want to try to find ways of finding those individuals that might be more adaptable to a particular type of project, or you might want to find those low-hanging fruit individuals where you're able to work with them more easily. This would be a great way to do that. So the idea is writing these statements on cards and sorting them. Step Center actually has a really great summary. So if you're interested in how Step Center has used Q method or Q methodology in their work around sustainability, but it kind of has a lot of similarities to what we're doing, that would be a great place to look. All right, so this looks a little bit complex and confusing, but the idea here is that these are possible cards. So there's a couple ways that I'm going to present to you today that you could use a Q-sort methodology. And so one would be a change focused or kind of an evaluative, where you put a whole bunch of change cards, which would be these cards, on the table in front of an individual and say, what types of things have changed in your life because of the program? And you ask them to sort these cards. And what I haven't described is the little kind of triangle-y thing you see at the top, the reverse triangle, are places for each of these cards to fit. And so you want to, you make almost like a Likert scale, didn't happen to me at all, to definitely happened to me. And you ask individuals to sort these cards into those different categories. And you force people, in one sense, to put a certain number of cards into definitely happened to me and didn't happen to me. So the traditional pile sorting method, you might have 3 piles, like yes, maybe, no, or even just 2 piles. And this helps you to just aggregate a little bit and make it a little bit more rich than just a 3-pile sort. You might start with a 3-pile sort to begin with, but then ask individuals to place the cards in different locations. And then this would be, originally I'd hoped to use this method, and that's why it's something I'm really quite keen about, because I think it would could be quite powerful as a way to identify all of these different types of things that could have happened to you. What are the things that have happened to you? And then use those as launching pads to discuss those in more detail. So for example, if someone picks, yeah, changes in self-confidence has really happened either for me or someone I know, then you can use that as a way to start a conversation. And it allows it to be a much more participatory approach than just saying, let's talk about self-confidence, because maybe there's something else that has changed that an individual would want to talk about. So that's one way. That's a change-focused evaluative method of using card sorting. The second one is a critical consciousness approach. And this would be more used for formative research to identify the different kind of clusters or groups of individuals. So you might have a list of social norms. I pulled from ISF's work on the WASH gem, these 16 statements that are helping us to understand what people's kind of social norms or critical consciousness are. You see statements here like a woman's role is to serve her husband, or girls are more limited than boys in what they can do. And the idea with these statements is individuals would sort these into things that they agree with to disagree with. So that's the Likert scale, that's slightly different than the evaluative method. And you sort these cards in order to understand what are the different clusters of individuals. So we've used these statements in the WASH gem, plugging a different ISF project, as a way of designing an index or a scale, which might be one way to analyze. But another way would be to use these cards in an adapted Q sort, where you can begin to find out different clusters of individuals. So you can tailor interventions and specifically tailor activities, or even finding out ways to word activities better to encourage transformation, really, at the end of the day. So I'm going to just pause my screen sharing for just a moment. If there's any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. That's a lot of information that I just shared relatively quickly. But I'd like to give you an example of what this could look like in 2 different online formats. So just as I switch, feel free to type in the chat box or twiddle your thumbs if you'd like to do that too. It always seems easier when you're preparing, hey? There we go. All right, cool. So there are some online software tools that are usually paid. This is one of them here. Are you all seeing this that I'm showing? Cool. Melita, can you all see this? Yeah, cool. All right, great. So this is, I've set this up with those change cards. I selected 10 change cards, and I have adapted the Q sort, or that board. Some people call it the Ouija board, or the group, the cluster of the cards, of how you would approach them. And I've preliminarily done a pre-sort where I've put the cards into 2 different categories, and this is completely random. I haven't actually done this properly, but you are able to drag and drop, and you can send this link to anyone that might have internet. So that would be a way of, they can do it on their phone, or they can do it yeah, on a tablet, if you take it out to a community, if there's internet available. And I'm just seeing there's something in the chat. I want to make sure that I respond to that.
So just the pre-sort there of the categories in the left and the right, would that be agree and disagree?
Yes, and often they can pre-sort them into 3.
Yeah.
And certainly I've already done it. But yeah, you would do a basic pile sorting exercise to start with a group. And then once the initial pile sorting, and by pile sorting, I mean asking people to put them into 3 piles. Then once the 3 piles are designed, you can see here, I didn't put anything in the middle pile. I put lots of things in the top and the bottom pile. And then individuals on their phones or a tablet or a computer can drag and drop. And so the idea here is to drag and drop into, all right, which is the one that you've definitely seen the most change in versus things that you have seen the least change in. So this is kind of the high-tech version. This is a paid option. It isn't free. I think it's about $200 a month. So if you're doing it for a wider number of stakeholders, for example, with government officers, and you feel like they have relatively high tech savviness, then this could be a great option. But it might be a bit more high tech than we have ability for in the areas that we're working. But I just wanted to show, yeah, to share that this could be an option. And I just see a few questions in the chat. I'm going to address those quickly before I go to the other version. I've answered a QSort, haven't used it. Amazing. Yeah, thanks, Tiana. And cards for assessment. Yeah, exactly. So I've done tons of card sorting. I love card sorting. I did a deep dive when I was working with IDE in rural areas of Bangladesh, where I did card sorting with 52 focus groups and just thought it was the best thing ever. We did laddering. So we asked people to ladder toilets from the best toilet to the worst toilet to try to identify different clusters of what people thought good toilets were. And so there's ways to make it a bit more rigorous, and software like what I'm showing you now does the automatic analysis. And so that's the value of paying for a software like this, is that it would actually do the analysis for you and identify the clusters for you automatically. So if that's something that you have $200 for a month or two in your budget, it could be a really valuable spend. All right, so the next version is something that's a little less high tech. This is using Google Slide. Again, I have the same 10 cards here, and in the background of Google Slide, as a master, I'll just show you this really quickly. I have put the cards and added the wording "no change" and "a lot of change." This is just a way of having a background within Google Slide. You can do this with PowerPoint as well, so that people can't move the background boxes around. So once the master is set up, then you can put the cards here, and again, they're exactly the same. And then you would ask people to drag one card per box. My internet's getting a bit slow, but one card per box into each of the things, and they can move them around. And then they can either, if you're participating in an interview with them, you can kind of watch. One great way also is asking people to talk through what they're doing. So I see you've moved that card there. Why did you move that card? Or maybe as if you are watching someone or watching a focus group, if a card moves around a lot and it's like a contentious card, make sure you note that down and ask why. Why is that card so difficult? What makes it difficult? Is it the wording that's difficult? Is it the statement that needs to be updated in future iterations? Is it that it really is a difficult statement and you're not sure where to put it? But asking people to talk aloud as they're doing this activity and observing individuals as they do this activity is a very valuable qualitative research approach to actually understand a little bit more rich what's happening in people's minds. So feel free to ask people to share their thinking process as they're going. It's a little bit awkward at the start, but especially for individuals who might feel a bit more confident in sharing their thought patterns, it can be really powerful for the research team as well. Wonderful. So I'm popping back into my PowerPoint. Yeah, so this is how we've done it in Google. Now the low tech version, the version that I did in Cambodia before I had to untimely stop my research, was to do this using just print the cards out on either business cards or index cards. You can write them, the statements, or you can print them. And then to just put this on a piece of poster board, you just need a ruler and some measuring skills. And you can just do a hard copy. And this might be the best way. You can even put pictures on the cards as well and ask people to sort them into categories and then take a picture of the sort. You might want to take multiple pictures if there are multiple iterations of the sort, so that you can say, okay, this was the first version. And then when I started asking questions, we got to this version, so that you're capturing those changes. And again, that's not important for the actual clustering, but that's important for you to understand as a researcher. All right. So just really quickly, again, considerations for travel restrictions. It can be done digitally. It can be done in person or online. There are different options for payment. If you do the Google Slide or the hard copy version, there is analysis software that's free. I believe it's called QenQ. I'm happy to share that with you if you're interested, where you can basically put everything into a spreadsheet and it would still do the clustering analysis for you. So Deanna, you've asked around working in groups or one person. It's really been done both ways. And it really depends, again, going back to that overall summary of what you're trying to do. If your goal is to try to create clusters of individuals, then it probably would be best to do that individually. So if you're trying to find groups of social norm, individuals who align with different social norms in a particular group. So for example, if you're working with government and you want to identify those who are most progressive versus those who are most conservative, using those terms incredibly loosely, you would ideally work with individuals. But if you're doing the change focused one and you're trying to understand what types of change have happened within a program, you might be more, it might be easier to do it as a focus group. So it really does depend. If you go back to that, keeping things plumb or keeping things aligned, you know, what is the end use? And that will help you as you move back and forth. So keeping the end use and the theory in mind will help you keep the middle parts aligned as well. Yeah, cool. All right, so any kind of pros, cons, thoughts, questions, concerns, feel free to pop them in the chat about Q method. And then I'm just gonna do a bit of a time check for myself while we do that.
You're going great, Jess, thank you. So
Okay.
we've got 10 minutes for each
Okay, cool.
pieces.
Super.
But we will,
Does anyone
we'll
use Q
ask
method?
everyone each time, what do you think the pros and the cons are for each of these three methods? So at this stage, when you think about this process, what might be some positive angles of it, or what might be some challenges in using it?
If you can't think of anything at the moment, you're welcome to just pop it in the chat at a different time as well.
Yeah,
no worries.
That's fine. That's fine. We have tried to think about obviously travel restricted times and what you could do if you wanted to do the process that just mentioned of the actual physical cards. You could create your physical cards and post them to your participants, ask them to do it in the comfort of their own home, and then take a photo of it and send that photo back to you. So there are ways to, especially if sending them a URL for a piece of software like that is going to be a bit overwhelming and confusing, then you could have sort of like a simple set of instructions and ask them to do it at home and take a photo, and that could be your way of doing it. So there's lots of ways to do it without having to physically go to people as well.
Yeah, thanks, Melita. And yeah, Juliet, welcome, Juliet. I'm glad you made it. It's great. Hi. And Juliet popped something really important. Yeah, you have to know, in order to get the statements right, you have to know what to put. And I will say it's not a completely random list of things. With the evaluative one, where you're talking about changes, there's a lot of great literature that you can use to help establish this. The cards that I shared, I used a framework that actually Naomi led the design of, but there are other tools that you can use as well for that. But for getting statements right, for example, around social norms, you need to make sure that you have an equal number of positive and negative statements, and ideally you're designing those cards in such a way that there's a bit of nuance to the design, and I didn't get into that today, but there's a lot of great literature there around how to do that well. Yeah.
Great. And Alison's also mentioned that kind of deductive process of putting things on cards. What are you missing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I have often when I've done similar-ish things, I've said, is there anything missing, or are there any cards that you would add? And sometimes, in some circumstances, it depends on whether or not the Q sort is effective for that. You might even have a blank card where an individual could fill their own card in. That doesn't make it as easy for the statistical analysis on a Q sort, but if you're doing a regular pile sort, having a blank card with a Sharpie is a great way of making sure that you get those extra ones there too. Yeah.
Right. Oh, lots of good ideas there. We will move on to the next method now, but it's fantastic that you've written your pros and cons, because what we'll be doing is drawing them into writing this method up as a bit of a guidance or a tool for you, and we'll respond to all these pros and cons and use that in the development of the guidance. So thank you.
Wonderful. So moving on to the next one. Thanks, Melita. I'm going to be presenting something called internal learning system. And this is something I had never heard of until a couple of weeks ago when I designed the long list. But I think a lot of the concepts and the building blocks will be familiar to you. So we're using the theory of change from a project. The goal is to put together a set of prompts that can be used in a diary method to allow individuals to reflect on a particular project or a particular outcome or activity. The data is analyzed using either thematic analysis or content analysis or identifying personas. You can use narrative, thematic narrative, or quotations to share and to use that data as well. And this can be done in lots of different ways. So the traditional internal learning system was done with self-help groups in India, and it was this kind of workbook. This is the English version, but this workbook where microfinance self-help group individuals were handed this book and asked to fill this in over the period of, I believe, 5-6 months. And there was a monthly entry for them, and they took pictures and or drew pictures, pardon me, and wrote a few words down if they were able to. And I think there was a couple of other ways where they worked with individuals who were not literate to help track the learning. So this was originally done, as at a beneficiary level, but it can be easily done for change agents as well. So you're asking participants to reflect and share back information regarding specific prompts. So you might ask them what's been, and you could use a most significant change prompt, for example, what's been the most significant change for you this week? What's something that you've learned this week? What's something that's been difficult for you this week about being a female business owner, for example? And you can use lots of different forms to write or to send the data back to the research team or the MEL team. So it could be a Word document, WhatsApp, could be Facebook in a private Facebook message, or text, could be even something handwritten like in the self-help group workbook. It could be photographs. There's lots of different ways. They can either be done as a workbook where you might get the entire book at one time, like the example here, or you could send out a prompt to the individuals at each time. So you have to design a little bit, and you have to think a little bit ahead of what are the things you want people to respond to. But as a monitoring tool, this works quite well because you're getting a lot of information from individuals and you're getting their perspectives of what's happened and what are the challenges. And so ideally, you want to have the similar prompt that you're asking each time, and you're collecting that information over the course of time, and you're just trying to see, are things changing or are things becoming more easy? So for example, this would work really well with latrine producers, female latrine producers. I can see this working well where you would send out a prompt to them over text message and say, hey, how has your week been as a female latrine? What have been the challenges that you've experienced this week in maybe negotiating sales or negotiating sand inputs or whatever it might be? And you could focus on one particular theme like negotiation, or make it broader and just say, what have been the biggest challenges and the biggest highlights for you this week? And something like that could be a great way of collecting that information. And again, it can be quite low touch where you're sending a text message and you're just getting text messages back. And that, as long as you have that overarching framework and you're doing the pre-planning, that data can be really valuable. So I mean, I haven't spent nearly as much time on that one because I think it's a little bit more straightforward. But this can be easily done with government officials. This can be easily done with private sector individuals. There's lots of different options for different modalities. And again, like we talked about in our last webinar, the goal probably would be to find out what are the tools they're already using and leverage something that they're already comfortable and familiar with instead of teaching them a brand new tool. So if their way of communicating is Facebook Messenger, maybe finding out if we can use Facebook Messenger to share the information with them might be the best way instead of teaching them a brand new method. Yeah, so that was a bit of a quicker one. Are there any kind of comments, thoughts, concerns, questions about the method? And then also pros and cons regarding this kind of diaries internal learning system method.
Hi, can I ask a question again?
Absolutely. Sorry, I was coughing. I had my mic muted. Please go ahead.
Thank you for sharing the presentation. One thing I wanted to understand is that, yeah, this is a very good idea to collect information through diaries. We get a very lot of information, which could be very lengthy because they're writing it, right? So how will it not be very, very difficult to analyze these kind of information that we get, because it's written, it's very lengthy, you have to read it, it's very time consuming. I just wanted to understand the analysis process. Thanks.
Fabulous question. Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Asta. Yeah, so two thoughts on that. One, yes, absolutely. But you can be specific in your prompts about how long you want responses to be. And one of the things, I see that Vedna and Tyler are on this call, and one of the things the three of us have been chatting a lot about is giving people a certain size box is actually a really useful way of indicating how much response you want. So if you're doing something over Facebook Messenger, you can tell people to write, give them I would only like to have a couple of sentences. They can write a lengthy version as well. But having people compile and synthesize their ideas into a chat text message or into a Facebook message means that you're getting a little bit more concise data. Now you might be losing some of the richness, absolutely. But what we also talked about last time on our last webinar is that often these short versions can give you the same number of themes as longer text or longer prose. So the text message version can be really valuable. If you're sending this out in as a survey, again, being clear about the size of the box can be a really great way as well. And then using methodologies like content analysis, where you do word searches, could be a great way of being able to do the analysis more quickly and trying to understand what are the words that are coming up most frequently. And that might be a good first cut to understand what are the main themes that are coming across. Again, not perfect. You have things like individuals using different slang, individuals using different words for things. I was reading last night about sometimes it's even easier if you have one translator translating everything, because then they'll use the same words. But if everyone's typing in the same language, they might have different slang words. And so actually the translation process is a little bit of a synthesis process in identifying specific words, and it makes the word searches a little bit easier. But yeah, so I guess two points would be being clear about how much information you want people to share with you, and feeling free to use either text box size or word count limits, or using just a different particular method or approach to collect the data as a way of limiting that. Because you're right, we don't have time to go through tons, unfortunately. We'd love to, but it's not always easy. Anyone else on the research team want to? Yeah, no, a fabulous question. Joseph asked in the chat box, uptake. I've never actually used this. So if anyone has actually used this, please feel free to type in the box if you've used a method like this and what your uptake has been. I'm quite curious to see, because I'm actually not sure what the uptake has been. The only method of the three that I'm presenting today is actually the next one that I've actually used in person. I've used adaptations of all of these, but they're all relatively new to me, which is one of the fun things of doing this project. Yeah.
Jess, I can jump in and give an example from Cambodia, the CR program. They did something like this and incentivized people to write their stories and their anecdotes on a Facebook page, a closed Facebook group, and provided incentives such as prizes for the best post that week, and also popped it in kind of the contractual arrangements as well, the expectations that if you participate in this project as a partner, then you're expected to also fill in these, diaries as such, but via a Facebook page. So I think there's ways that you can build in the expectation of writing short little, I guess, responses to key questions, or just an overall experience of that week of working, and what were the challenges, what were the things that surprised you, what were the opportunities, and building it into the project from the outset. So it's been very successful in Cambodia in that example.
Thanks, Melita. Yeah, and that highlights another aspect where this can be either something that's done as a group. So in a closed Facebook group where you might have multiple participants posting into a single chat or a single space. It could also be done with a WhatsApp group, or an individual where a MEL officer or individual might send a specific text message to one individual government official and receive the response back, for example. So that you have to be careful and be cognizant that there are a couple of different ways. There are open versus closed methods to do this. Yeah, exactly. And Josie, you said about reflective practice. So if we go back to the title of this particular method, this is called the internal learning system. And the idea is that it is a reflective and reflexive process for the individuals who are participating as agents. Yeah, thanks, Chloe. That's really valuable. So World Vision Vanuatu has used a closed Facebook group of creating content and sharing learnings across a really dispersed team. Yeah, so this can be used internally within the organization as well as with change agents. It could work in either way. Fantastic. So I think we'll move on to the third method. And this might be something that you have used or seen. This is photo voice. And again, this can be done similarly to the ILS method, where it's used as a diary, or alternative ways where you can do it as transect walks, and you go around and you take pictures together as a group. There's lots of different ways to do this, but you're identifying representative photographs to describe change. And again, the prompts are designed based on the theory of change. So you don't want to just go out and say, go take a picture of something that's interesting. There needs to be some kind, I mean, that maybe you want to, but there should be some kind of prompt around what kind of picture you want people to take. And this is what makes photo voice as an evaluative tool different than regular photo voice. So photo voice as a transformation tool allows individuals to take pictures primarily of anything that they are interested in. But used as an evaluative tool, these prompts are quite specific about what types of pictures you are interested in them taking. And that's a little bit different. So if you've done any kind of more formalized photo voice training, you may have seen that like the workshops are very core components of allowing people to talk and explain about their photos. Definitely valid, definitely true. But in photo voice as a MEL method, the prompts are really critical. So you might do a participatory workshop with the ID Cambodia team. We also designed like a training program on how to take better pictures with your smartphone as a kind of a teaser to get people in the room. And then the trade-off for getting the course was to have to take a couple of pictures as part of the MEL method. So there are ways of being able to support that as well with the certificate at the end for those individuals. One way of getting good prompts is to ask people to do an experience canvas, and I can share this later if I think I have a slide on this. You're collecting photographs and then also sharing photographs, and this is the next thing as well. And this could be in a closed or an open group. There are lots of digital tools where you can have all of the participants post their pictures live to something like Padlet, which is a basic web page where you can upload a picture and a small comment, or and lots of individuals can upload, but it can be password protected and only open to a certain number of people. So it's a little bit like Facebook, but it will work a lot more secure. Then there are options for analysis to ask people to, we've used voice. So asking people what the value of the photo is. Is it a positive picture or a negative picture? And each of the letters in voice stands for a different thing that we're asking them about their photograph. Another version of this is show, where again, you're asking people to talk about their photograph using show. I can't exactly remember what the acronym stands for, but different prompts to describe and to caption their photo. You can display the photos in a digital gallery and ask people to code their themes themselves. So what is this picture about? Caption, give it a title. And that part is actually just as important as the process of having them take the picture. So the pictures can be used in lots of different ways. Again, Step Center has a great summary on the method if you're interested in using and looking at that summary. So for travel restricted times, traditionally Photo Voice would ask people to take pictures on provided digital cameras, and they might give them the camera at the end. However, it's valuable to, in kind of these travel restricted times, to leverage people's smartphones. So most people have smartphones that can take pictures. We'll be putting up, I think most likely putting up some basic like smartphone photography training materials onto the website once we get that finished in the next couple of months, that can be shared within the team and be easily translated into lots of different languages. It's very pictorial specifically, so that it can be used and adapted into multiple languages. The discussion about photos, which is important too, right? So sharing and discussing photos can be done online in a webinar or on social media platforms like a closed Facebook group or Padlet. And then you can also exhibit and engage the photos. So this might be exhibiting the photos to the senior management team and allowing this to be a conversation, or with a donor group, allowing it to be a conversation about where the next direction of the project might be, for example. But the idea being, as an evaluative tool, it is different, and the prompts are really quite critical. So just to share really quickly as well, one method that we've used in Cambodia is we took a blank piece of paper and we drew a circle with a line through it. We put a little stick figure of a woman and we put a little stick figure of a man. And we asked, does that make sense? We kind of divided the paper in half the top half for women and the bottom half for men, for example, or vice versa. And we asked people to think about a specific activity that the project was doing. So that might be a training, that might be a sales meeting with a possible household client, that might be a government meeting. It could be lots of different things. And the idea is to brainstorm about how women and men experience that particular activity differently. And so it could be drawings or ways of getting, and this kind of thinking activity, we call it an experience canvas, allows the photographer to think in advance about the types of pictures they might want to take. So asking people to go take pictures about gender equality doesn't really work. I mean, you can imagine that, but it gets quite complex. But if you, I've tried, but if you ask people to take pictures of how women and men have experienced things differently, and you start with this canvas where you think of a specific activity. So again, it might be an activity of selling a toilet or building a toilet. And you start by highlighting the differences between how men and women are doing that activity or experiencing that activity. That can be a good intro to what kind of pictures individuals want to take. Yeah. All right, so I'm just looking at the comments here. We've got some beautiful things here. It can be used in a most significant change way. Yes, just we tried that as well in Cambodia. So what's been the most significant change in your life? And that might be the prompt that you want to use. So that could be another way. Or how have women and men experienced this program differently? Could be the prompt. But it comes back to making sure there's alignment across all the different aspects of the method. Yeah. Thanks, Juliet, for answering. I didn't even see you responded. Great. All right. Well, I hope those three methods have kind of piqued your interest a little bit, or at least made you a little bit curious to see what else we will share. Again, there are 10 methods. Hopefully, knock on wood, will be able to be put up on the website in the coming weeks and months, and we'll be working with our partners to select one of those 10 to pilot in their programs. So I'm going to hand it over to Juliet. We've got about 8 minutes, Juliet, to kind of wrap up and then summarize. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Jess, and fantastic explanations. And feel free, we've jumped past pros and cons on Photo Voice, but feel free to type those in the chat if you can multitask, because I just talked through and we do this last activity. So this was your wish list from the needs assessment about what people were interested to learn about, and the light coloured ones are ones that we hope anyway that you also feel that we've been dealing with in this webinar, which is about basic introduction to qualitative monitoring, evaluation and learning. You heard earlier a bit more about sampling and how to think about sample sizes and different types of populations that you're trying to get the views of as participants. And you heard a bit about how the quality criteria, or the things that help us trust qualitative data or qualitative analysis and research, evaluation, are quite different to quantitative. They're a different way of assessing whether you trust that data. So you can't apply the same criteria from quantitative to qualitative, and that's often it's that misunderstanding that leads to a mistrust of qualitative information. And you've had at least some exposure to a wider range of approaches, and there will be more. So that's will also be in the third webinar. So the dark blue are areas that we hope to cover in the third webinar, which is next year. And if we could then move to the next slide, there is a Menti to get a little bit of feedback on and get a sense from the group of at least the 3 that you've heard about. What sounds interesting? What do you think might work for you to expand your existing MEL arrangements on the basis of what you've heard today? And clearly, there's more to learn, and there's, each of any of those approaches would need some quite careful design, but at least you've got some beginning ideas. So if you can jump into the Menti, it's also, Melita's put it in the chat on a link to make it quick and easy for you. And hopefully the results will just pop up as they're meant to. All right. So QSort and Photo Voice are winning. Less certain about the diaries for now, based on whoever's quick to get into the system. Let's see if it evens up. To check how many people are online. 25 people are online, so it's evening out. I mean, and as Jess has said, it's really horses for courses with these different types of methods. They can be adapted in so many different ways, but it really, really depends on what your purpose is. And coming back to the needs assessment, what aspects of gender equality regarding change agents you really want to get at. And some things, for instance, photo voice, it might be harder to capture in a photo. Things that happen in people's relationships and how they speak to one another or whatever, like this, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why the captioning of photos is super valuable.
Yes, yeah, because then you can actually say what is meant by this picture of these 2 people, and that they're not shouting at each other. Actually, that was a really good debate. Yeah. All right. So just in the interest of time, I'll move us on. It's good to see that there's interest in all 3. And so clarifying our next steps from here is that we're moving into...
PowerPoint has frozen.
It's frozen? That's all right.
Yeah.
Do you want to... Okay,
we're good
now. Okay, cool. So as we showed, I guess, through each webinar, this is a 4-stage project that we're leading, and we're moving from the curation phase of where we were, as Jess said, starting from a massive database of way too many methods to come down to some that we think would be most useful to you. And we're going to move into a collaborate phase where we work with at least on the basis of the needs assessment with SNV, World Vision and IRC to put some of these into practice. Maybe the 3, any of the 3 you've heard about, or maybe others from the 10 that we've narrowed things down to. And that will take place over the next few months. And after that, we'll then have a basis for some actual real lived experiences of what it takes to implement these, and we'll be in a position to share that through a 3rd webinar, which will be in early February, on the 4th of February. So that was all from us, I think. Jess, Naomi or Melita, anyone want to add anything to close?
I think that's perfect. Thank you, Juliet, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and we hope that that was useful to you. We hope that those who missed it just managed to watch it, and they even got to the end of the if you're listening to me now, you listened to an hour and a half. Well done. And we look forward to being in touch with those organisations that have elected to pilot. If you are not one of them, but you still would be interested to have dialogue with us about any of these methods, we are absolutely open. The doors are open. Please just get in touch. We're happy to engage your support kind of at any level and have conversations about these. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Melita and Jess, for your fantastic break.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, we'll be in touch via the hub. Have a good rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving to any Americans who might be on. There might not be any, but just in case.
And Raj, yes, we will make the recording available.
Yeah, and just on the recording, we'll be putting that up on the hub. So all that information will be on the hub, so you'll be able to. Yeah. Great, Akila, great to hear. Thanks. Yeah, and we'll stick around in this for a little while. So if you have any specific other questions that you didn't get a chance to, just like in a real webinar, or if we were really in a room, you could stick around and have a quick conversation with us if you'd like.
Yeah. I am going to jump off, Jess.